Well, thank you for that introduction and the warm welcome we have received here in Abruzzo. And thank you to the EUROPARC Federation for the invitation. I just want to say first for the U.S. National Park Service that we're back. And I apologize for our absence on the International Community of Protected Areas. Recently, I have a strong personal interest in international protected areas and have been involved in this work for some time. Let me see if I can get this figured out here. There we go. I was personally involved in setting up and assisting the national park systems in places such as China and Cambodia recently. And I firmly believe that we have a lot to share and a lot to learn in the international community. Our experience has not only given us knowledge that we can share, but we can learn from you as well. And it is my intention to rebuild our international program in the National Park Service. Recently, we signed a North American Wilderness Agreement here in Mexico as an intention to show working across our borders. A number of Italian park professionals have just visited the United States as a part of an ongoing cooperative relationship. Our Northeast region has really set the standard with working with the Italian Nature Conservation Service and the EUROPARC Federation, with two new relationships, one in Acadia on the coast of Maine, and we formed a partnership there with Dolomiti Balanusi National Park in the Italian Alps. And our Conservation Studies Institute signed a cooperative agreement with the Italian Union for Parks and Nature. This last summer has been dominated in the United States with our oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. And the spill has really dominated my time as well. I spent over 2 months as an incident commander in the Gulf of Mexico. That's me in the sunglasses there with our Secretary of Interior, really working to protect the over 36 U.S. Fish and Wildlife refuges and the 9 national parks that are in the Gulf of Mexico, you can see, and the oil spill there marked by the Mississippi Canyon. Nearly every scene on the national parks seemed to show an oil-covered bird or a blackened marsh or a beach that was contaminated with oil. The National Park Service manages over 150 miles of barrier islands along the Gulf, and it's a vast area essential to the habitat for nesting birds, nesting sea turtles, spawning ground for fish and shrimp. And one of my key responsibilities as the incident commander down there was to not only protect these places from the oil, but to also protect them from the impacts of the response itself. There was a zeal, shall we say, to do something visible, if not politically important on the news media, but at times could have a significant impact to the resources as well. So every day we tempered our responses and our actions to protect these extraordinary areas while the oil kept flowing. But we knew in the National Park Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that protecting these places of biodiversity were going to be essential to the restoration of the Gulf. The scale of this response was unprecedented. For instance, we had to take action and remove sea turtle nests from the Gulf and put them on the Atlantic coast in order for to increase the potential of survival for loggerhead and green sea turtles. It also reminded us that the Gulf of Mexico's ecology is inextricably linked to the economy and the people of the Gulf. And so path to restoration was linked to the people as well. For those of you that are, you can't really do a program like this without having one slide that looks like this. We stood up a strategic sciences working group where we brought scientists with deep expertise in the Gulf to really look at the response and our restoration side of the Gulf. And that team has just reassembled, and we're really working to inform the managers about how to restore the Gulf, not only from the oil spill, but from all the history of impacts to the Gulf of Mexico, how this ecosystem can essentially ultimately be restored. This summer's events really served as a real reminder to us of our responsibilities for ecosystem protection. The National Park Service in the U.S. manages 392 individual parks and monuments covering about 34 million hectares. We're comprised of mountains and forests, deserts and wetlands, prairies, and coral reefs. About 1/4 of our endangered species find refuge in these places. We also manage the nation's cultural and heritage sites, places of social change, places reminders of the pains of injustice. These are seminal places that remind all Americans, and our foreign visitors as well, of the pain and the high ideals of freedom and democracy. While we manage the most intact ecosystems in North America, oases for plants and animals, they are fragmented habitats. And yet, there are also barriers in between these fragmented habitats that block natural processes, for instance, Hoover Dam and Lake Mead. Our parks are under siege from development, from invasive species, and what I believe the greatest threat of all, which is climate change. We are already seeing in our national parks the effects of climate change. The glaciers in Mount Rainier, in Olympic, and in North Cascades are receding. There are more rain-on-snow events in these parks, often causing major flooding. There's less snow in the Sierras and less water in that snow as well, resulting in less water into the Central Valley. Lake Mead National Recreation Area in the Southwest has dropped to nearly 50% of its original level. You can see the water line there on the top of the hill. Wildfires in the West are burning 20 days longer than any time in history. Species such as this pika are migrating upwards in elevation in the Sierras, ultimately popping off the top where they will have nowhere to go. And coral reefs are dying from bleaching throughout the Pacific as well. If there's any silver lining to the challenge of climate change, it is that we are finally beginning to think and act at the ecosystem scale. We faced a monumental task of educating a nation and the world and impressing upon it that the world outside of protected area boundaries is every bit as important as the natural world within. It is my hope that a disaster like the Gulf, and as a result climate change, will drive us together. In many cases, it's been said that humanity does its best, shows its best in a disaster. But I'm an optimist as well. So let me share with you a few of the things that we are doing with the protected areas system in the U.S. to deal with climate change. This one, by the way, this is Point Reyes National Seashore, and you can see water coming in. We breached a dike system there, and for the very first time in over 100 years are allowing the sea to re-enter what was a wetland.